It's our 7th and final week of the regular season here at the Hearthstone Grandmasters. We've had 12 matches played each across the players so far, which means in our final week we are wrapping up, and next week we're getting to playoff stuff. And that's admirable, and joining me is Sottle. And Sottle, you haven't been here at the studio the whole time,
No.
but I know you've seen the whole season. Talk to me about some highlights that you've had from this season so far.
I've just enjoyed watching the meta evolve, and we've kind of like reached a fairly settled point now, I think, for the final week, you know, particularly in Europe, where we're seeing the players kind of stick to the three tried and true classes, the Rogue, Mage, Warrior. But more importantly, I've just been very interested in seeing us get to that point, because we have been through various iterations, and there's been various players trying to throw a spanner in the works with something new and unusual. Unfortunately, we've got where we were, whereas where it seems like the three classes that are on top in the game are what they are in Specialist as well. But it's been really interesting to see the game evolve to that point.
Some pieces got to be the queen, some pieces got to be the rook, some pieces got to be the bishop. That's kind of the way I see it. It's taken a long time to figure it out. We take a look at the standings and see how things have been shaping up for those players as they've been figuring it out. Because this week we do only have Mage, Warrior, and Rogue in play. Again, you know, they're trying their hardest to try to put up these wins, because you can see at that advanced to finals line, that's where they're trying to be. They're trying to be that top 3 mark in their division. And they got 2 more matches in order to secure it. And I'm really looking at Division B the most, because these records are stacked so closely together that it's really in the running, I think, all the way down through Yarla in Division B.
Yeah, and I guess this would be a good time to just take a look at how the tiebreakers work, because there are 2 tiebreakers that come into play. One is the head-to-head record against the player that you are playing against. So if you are 2-0 against that player, you just automatically defeat them in the tiebreakers. From there, it will then go to the overall score in your tiebreaker 2, which is the score of the players that you have, or sorry, the number of wins of the players that you have defeated combined. Now that sounds very complicated, because it is, but there are a couple of things to look out for in more simple terms. Kolento, Bunnyhopper, Viper are basically fighting out in Division A. Kolento plays against Viper this week, which means that is a huge match for Kolento just to lock it up. Also, currently, Bunnyhopper and Viper are tied on their tiebreaker 2, which means every single win for not just them, but each of the players they've played previously becomes hugely important for their record.
Indeed, we're looking at the schedule right now where Theis versus Kolento is going to kick things off, and we have prepare yourselves for Rogue versus Mage. We have a number of small iterations of tech choices that are going to be making this a debatable matchup until we go all the way to Orange versus Swids, where it's a Rogue mirror match. And Kolento was able to take out Theis in that first time they faced. These are all rematches we're watching at this point.
Yep.
Where Kolento won 2-1 with Beast Hunter over the Cyclone Mage from Theis. But kind of taking a look at, again, the feature decks and what's going on here, I feel like the big talking point for the evolution of that metagame has been what tech choices people have been using in their secondary or their tertiary deck. What few cards do they swap up to really make a difference in their matchup?
Yeah, I think that's something that I really harped on last week as well. Having some more time to reflect on it, I could sort of crystallize those thoughts more. And what's really interesting to me is seeing players go with reactive cards in generally proactive decks, right? And I'm talking specifically about Rogue in that scenario, where generally one of the go-to techs is to bring in more copies of Walk the Plank and Betrayal against Mage, which is interesting to me, because generally, like historically in Hearthstone, if you're a proactive deck, your goal was to just make your deck as proactive as possible. You don't want to put reactive cards in there, because historically in Hearthstone, the guy being proactive, the guy asking questions, the guy setting tempo, the guy demanding answers from the opponent is heavily favored in a game of Hearthstone. What's interesting is because with Mage, they have the ability to just blow past everything you can do so easily. Just ignore what you do, make 4 giants, right? Ignore what you do, make 2 giants. So they can just seize tempo immediately, which I think is why we're seeing Rogue go with some of those techs. We're seeing removal options like Walk the Plank and Betrayal.
And we're going to take a look at Mage in particular to look at some of the tech choices, because I do want to touch on your issue there of tempo. We're looking at Viper's deck right now, and this was one that stood out to you particularly interesting because of Viper's tertiary deck.
Yeah, and this is kind of the other side of that, where we're seeing how Mage is being teched against Rogue. For me, Viper playing 2 copies of Frostbolt, that is right up my alley in terms of how I want to beat Rogue. I think if you can just take care of a couple of 3/3s and 4/3s in the early game, that buys you so much time. Even on turn 5, like Arcane Intellect plus a Frostbolt to deal with their with a 4/3 on their side of the board. Again, it's just a perfectly smooth turn.
Spirit of the Shark.
To keep you going. Yeah, Spirit of the Shark. If it needs to die, it needs to die. That kind of stuff. My one sticking point with this tertiary deck is that he removes Archmage Antonidas in order to get that job done, which I think Antonidas, particularly when you're playing a Luna's Pocket Galaxy in your your deck. Like, that's such an automatic high roll, I win the game potential kind of card. And even without Luna's Pocket Galaxy, I think this might just be a playstyle thing for me, but I find a lot of games I can see a path to Antonidas winning the game, even against some of the more aggressive strategies. So that might be a thing that just I play towards more than other players too. You know, there are multiple ways to win many games of Hearthstone, and quite often I just lean into the Antonidas line when I see it. You know, these other players might see different options and consider Antonidas surplus to requirements.
Well, kind of talking to your point, you know, it was last week that Orange went onto the fatigue style plan with his rogue deck.
Yeah.
He looked down at the other side and said, well, if they've gone into a different deck build, they've removed Antonidas, which means that I can actually just eliminate all of their threats. And that was actively a game plan he played with towards against Yarla.
Right.
Where he started, you look at a certain point and you went, Orange is actually just blowing everything up. It's like a very purple-esque line to take in that one. Purple, one of the America's Grandmasters, and known for his end game play where he sees those fatigue situations way ahead of time. You know, that tells me that's something Orange had found during practice. It's like, well, wait a minute. If they don't have Antonidas, how did they actually kill me from that point?
And this brings us around right full circle to the rogue techs again, because if they're taking out Antonidas from their rogue tech, which they often do, and you then have more copies of Betrayal and Walk the Plank in your deck, then all of a sudden you are able to achieve that kind of strategy. So it's really interesting to me how we've seen the techs go up against the techs, right? You're not just teching for the primary deck, you're teching for what your opponents are going to try and counter you with.
Indeed. Players who had a matchup where they swapped to their deck from game 1 into game 2 and their opponents did not swap. They started out with a 38% win rate in game number 1, and then when they swapped, they moved to a 54% game win rate. Post those secondary and tertiary decks. So a pretty massive delta in terms of win rates.
16% is so huge. Like, it's hard to get that across to someone who doesn't have like a full understanding of, you know, how tight win rates are at the top of Hearthstone. A 16% swing is massive.
You went from winning about a third to winning over half.
Yeah.
Pretty big difference. We got to go to a quick break, but we have Theis versus Kolento. That's kicking off week 7, day number 1, our final week before we head into playoffs just next week. So when we come back, that first game is getting underway. That's admirable. Sottle, Theis, Kolento. It's coming up. Game 1, Week 7, Day 1. Give me the lowdown.
Staccato casting, I like it. Yeah, Theis versus Kolento. So Kolento has 2 huge matches coming up this week. Of the 3 players fighting it out for those 2 spots remaining in Group A, he is in the prime position. He is a win ahead, and he also has the best tiebreaker 2 score out of the 3 players involved, which means a win here puts him to the highest attainable point that Bunny Hopper and Viper can also reach in terms of match wins. Because he has an even record against them in terms of head-to-head tiebreakers, and because he already has the best tiebreaker 2 score out of the 3 players involved, that puts him in a very, very strong position. I'm not going to say locked, I'm not going to say anything like that, because it's extremely complicated. But he does have a match later on this week against Viper, which could end up being even more crucial than this one is. But we'll get into the decks nice and quick. Kolento playing a single copy of Frostbolt in his main deck with Mage, which I'm a big fan of. He's also packing the Luna's Pocket Galaxy, which was a hot point of debate last week, or at least we made it into one. And then Archmage Antonidas, of course, the card that I focused on quite heavily in the pre-show. Apart from that, pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, you know, the Frostbolt, I think, was the big Kolento kicker in Week 1 alongside the Magic Dark Frogs for the anticipation of aggro decks.
Yeah.
You know, the copy of Snip Snap in the main over one of the Banana Buffoons, that's kind of interesting
That's
to
true.
me.
Yeah.
The cards in hand have been very valuable, but, you know, Snip Snap's just a good card.
Right. Worth looking at also, he doesn't really have a tertiary or secondary deck to switch to go anti-rogue. He has Snap Freezers and Questing Adventurers in one, and then he just has big beefy stuff that's anti-warrior in another, so could potentially be found wanting there. But admirable, this is Rogue from Theis, but it's not quite the Rogue we've been used to.
Well, so we had a little bit of a card change, and one of them was specifically for consistency's sake. And Pilfer is the card that I'm looking at here. Pilfer's text now reads akin to Hench Clan Burglar, where it says, add a card to your hand from another class. Not from your opponent's class, as it used to say, from another class. Which means that that Underbelly Fence in the 2-mana slot can be a 2-mana 3/4 if you lead with Pilfer on 1.
Against Rogue, specifically, is the change, right?
Yes.
That's the difference. Because this has always been possible against 8 other classes in the game.
The problem is Rogue tends to be about a 1/3 of those classes.
Yes. So that could end up being a very impactful change. I think Theis, very similar to what we saw last week, does want to do something a little different for these remaining weeks. You know, he is an entertainer, he's a big streamer, he's got a lot of fans. He wants to give them something entertaining to look at. So just throwing a little bit of spice into the Rogue mix with that Pilfer package. He's
always tended to add his own spice to things as well. I think it's just being highlighted in these last couple weeks. Last week he brought the Chef Nomi Priest, which, you know, we pretty much laid into. It has been, I think, the worst performing deck in Grandmasters, aside from maybe like Big Mech Hunter in the early weeks. But in this week, you know, I'm a big fan of Underbelly Fence. Anything that's a 2-mana and has a 3/4 stat line, it could overload me for like 6. I'd probably still play it. And with Tunnel Trog, that would just be a benefit. Hey. But we're underway in the match. Kolento kept on to some minions in the opening hand. That tends to be the mage style that we have found works best, I'd say, over the last 2 months or so.
Yeah, definitely evolved to that point. Particularly more so when going first, just having minions and playing minions is one of the best ways you can find yourself a platform to then, you know, fill up your hand with cards later and do more explosive stuff with Mountain Giant when you get more mana available. But yeah, going first for sure, it does seem like the minion curve is quite powerful, but even in tempo matchups like this one against Rogue, even when going second, the minion curve can be very powerful as well.
One of the big things that I look at is for Luna's Pocket Galaxy specifically. I feel like one of the only ways you can actively just cast that card as early as you can is if you can force your opponent to take a less than ideal turn.
Yes.
Usually requires having something in play.
How much is this worth to you?
River Croc. Go.
Don't you talk bad about my boy River Croc.
It was just an observation.
I'm letting you know. I'm just warning you.
Okay.
Don't want to play Sorcerer's Apprentice into that. Don't blame him. And hand size going to be a consideration as well. Looking at Snip Snap and Ziliax's potential play. I feel like this coin is going to really shape the way that Kolento's playing this game.
I think so too. Yeah, and just one of the big reasons why that 2/3 came down from Theis was honestly to look at preemptively dealing with the Sorcerer's Apprentice, because he didn't have anything in hand that would be able to take care of it. You don't necessarily need to go further beyond the fact that it was a 2-3 and he played it so that it was in play. But beyond that, there was, of course, the additional concern of, hey, if he plays an Apprentice next turn, I have no way of killing it right now, so I need a minion on board.
Board's getting quite big as well for Kolento. Snip Snap helping to supplement the Sea Giant. Saw Theis take a sip of tea as he passed his turn. And I feel like this was exactly what Theis was going for, too, is try to force some action from the opponent and then lead into Spear to the Shark and have the massive refill on the Novice Engineer and Evil Miscreant afterwards. And so I think that he's wise to pay attention aboard this spot. You know, Sea Giant is a real concern, but at the same time, when I have Spear to the Shark down and I'm about to draw like a million cards, I feel like I always want to just do as much damage as I can and just, if my opponent has an explosive turn, to waste my stuff killing it because I'm about to draw like 60 million cards on the next turn.
Right. And I don't think you have to worry too much about Sea Giant in the immediacy because you have the sap in hand. So you just need to worry about Sea Giant plus things, but also in this matchup, you do consistently need to plan long-term about Sea Giant things, right? Like sometimes just trade off some 1/1s now so they don't get Frost-Nova'd later, and then a Sea Giant can come into play.
I am kind of interested in this. I mean, this did cost Theis 5 damage overall.
Yeah.
Versus the, you know, flexibility of eliminating the board. So I feel like Ziliax is a big player in that regard, in terms of what he's paying attention to.
I think also just similar scenario to what I talked about, right? Like he feels like he wants to play Novice Engineer, Evil Miscreant this turn a lot of the time. Now he drew the Backstab, which means he can even end up playing Miscreant Lackeys. And in this kind of scenario, if he was to still have all of those minions on his board, plus a bunch of these Lackeys coming down, that Sea Giant's starting to get real cheap.
Yeah.
So again, I think just a turn ahead of time, he was just saying, you know what, I don't need these minions in play. No
now,
step this turn.
I am not a rogue expert, but I have seen Novice Engineer Shadow Stepped more than just about any other minion in the deck.
Unity, precision, perfection.
Foregoing the 3-cost Giant to kill the Shark.
Yep.
Don't tell me Shark is a bad card.
Ziliax and the 1 copy of Frostbolt. That's basically all Kolento had to be able to answer that. Fortunate to have the Ziliax on hand.
See, now I look at that Shadow Step and that Novice Engineer and think to myself, this could have been 2 more cards. Like, you had a 0-mana Arcane Intellect in your hand, and you went, nah. I'm curious about that.
That's hot.
How much is this worth to you?
Sure.
It's the simple.
River Croc.
It's the simple things in life I get joy from.
Yeah.
So for Theis, it's still about building towards an endgame plan here. He wasn't able to be aggressive. This tells me he wants to Shadow Step the Evil Miscreant. So I feel like he's going to be fishing for lackeys to just perform utility functions, like trying to discover spells, trying to find ways to poke these minions down.
This guy's tough.
Yeah, and that is curious to me as well, because we talked last week about how, with the exception of Orange, who of course did set out for that fatigue plan in a way that was quite inspired. Not quite as inspired as the lethal that he eventually found, but Evil Miscreant in this matchup is a little bit weaker in power level than it is in some others, because the lackeys end up being a little bit low impact. They do end up playing into Sea Giant kind of stuff. So personally for me, like that Shadow Step would have been looking at either A, drawing cards, B, dealing damage, or C, getting treasures. I think Shadow Stepping Miscreant is often option D on my list in the matchup.
Well, I feel like we're going to need option C. How on earth do I answer 2 Giants at the same turn?
Kind of don't.
Yeah, it's a pretty massive turn, honestly.
Not quite sure if Kolento wants to use these bananas this turn. He's already seen 1 backstab here, and he knows Theis plays sap. So right now, the only real viable sap target is the Mountain Giant, because the Sea Giant would be so cheap when it comes back anyway. So I think maybe keeping these additional cards in hand is to his benefit.
Well, I'm thinking about specifically like lackeys, right? He's thinking lackey generation.
That's true.
There's 5 in hand right now.
That's a fair point.
So 2 damage, +1 in rush. Like all of the lackeys I feel are very effective. And so I think that if you're going to use bananas, the mirror images are probably the wisest place. And that puts Theis in a pretty awkward spot. If you sap the Mountain Giant, it's coming down next turn for 7 mana. Perhaps that's enough, though.
So many options.
Yeah, there's no way he can get through to the Sea Giant as well as sapping the Mountain Giant, I don't think.
Clear the path!
It's hot. The void.
Ooh, Theis. Plays a Faceless Lackey before trading off the required board spaces. I don't think there's any reason he wanted to do this.
No, you saw him roll his eyes. When
Okay, I wasn't looking at the
Yeah.
player camera. But, you know, sometimes there is a spot where you want to make that thing happen to manipulate board space for kind of Sea Giant kind of things, or just playing a more powerful minion after you trade off. But in that case, I just don't think that's the case. I think it's just a straight up mistake, Theis.
Yeah, excuse me on the Mountain Giant as well. I was mistaken about that. Oh my.
And that's huge.
That's what I was talking about. If you sap the Giant, he's going to draw Conjurer's Calling and use it twice instead.
That's what I heard you say. That's why I didn't correct you.
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah.
There's no video evidence to the contrary. And under no pressure, Kolento doesn't even need to take a defensive measure here. 7-9 or 8-8, which one's better? I think if you think about the breakpoints, 7-9 tends to be a little stronger because of, you know, like backstab vendetta kind of stuff. But you know what's stronger? Freezing out your opponent's minions so they can't attack your big things so that you can kill them afterwards.
Oh, you were asking that question with the intention of Conjurer's Calling again? I think I definitely leant towards the Frostnova that turn.
Well, I did too. I just like drawing up a dramatic pause for it.
Okay.
Like one more minion or stop all opponents' board. I think it's stop board.
Yeah. Decent clear up here on at least the 8-8, but Theis knows that he is still in rough shape. Although from his perspective, he's probably sat there thinking, well, if there's no second Frost Nova, I can beat just one copy of Conjurer's Calling here.
And mind you, one of those Frost Novas was from a magic trick early on that Kolento played. So there's still one more Frost Nova in the deck. Second magic trick's been picked up. He's taken 7 damage. Kolento's going to threaten lethal here. Doesn't quite secure it. With that ping,
That's right. He
will.
just pings face this turn, yeah. Pings face this turn, pings face next turn.
There you go. And so, without a miracle, Theis is looking at game 2 down a game.
Theis needs to find some way to get a minion off his board this turn so he can play his Life Drinker from hand.
Pilfer into Blizzard, perhaps.
Yikes.
Not anymore, but Pilfer into Nova. Eye for an eye. Not quite.
Sure.
But you know what? Sometimes it just beats that way. Noble Sacrifice would actually not even proc in the situation because the board is full.
That is a good observation.
In my head, I was, why did that cost 0?
Kalimgos.
So Kolento, I think, is just thinking through the secrets real quick and going, there's not something crazy, right? There's not. Nope. Up a game. And I'm looking at these side decks from Kolento, and none of them spell I want this versus Rogue. And I think that's trouble for not only for Theis in this match, but also for Bunny Hopper and for Viper, who are looking at trying to secure a playoff spot here. A match win for Kolento is massive where playoff standings are concerned.
Yeah, puts him in a hugely favorable position, but as mentioned, he does now have to go into these remaining 2 games without a dedicated deck to switch to. And with the statistic that we gave in our little pre-show, Theis, on average, just based on last week's result, is going to increase his win rate by 16% by switching to a deck that he has dedicated to beating Mage, which does have Fairy Dragons and Blink Foxes coming into the deck, which aren't featured in his core deck, interestingly enough.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting to me. You know, his game plan is clearly the pilfer into Underbelly Fence, and then I guess when he goes to other games, he goes, you know what, the Blink Fox, as long as he's on a Rogue mirror match, helps me activate this even further.
Yep.
And so that was the thinking specifically, is that he wanted to be stronger versus Rogue?
Just potentially just against Mage, I think just having the smoother curve, just being able to play more aggressive minions early on just makes sense as well. Just being able to go, having that curve pilfer into Underbelly, into Blink Fox, just be available for you for a huge amount of pressure. It just makes sense to me too.
Blink Fox just not quite super good versus Rogue, it feels like.
Yeah.
Kind of like it. 2 Fairy Dragons, 2 Blink Fox, Walk the Plank. Walk the Plank is the card I think that's probably been the most surprising to me.
Why's that?
It's just such a weird, like, not good card. You couple it with a pair of 3 attack minions that you suck to board, and it just suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, Walk the Plank is sick.
Right.
And like you see discoveries across the board from lackeys, and it's like you're against Mage, and it's like, Walk the Plank! Walk the Plank! I'm like, why is that? Like, I was never ever excited about Assassinate, even when I had 3 cost discount preparations in my deck.
We were watching a game from APAC as they were just rounding up before we got on air, where I think there were 3 additional Destroyer minion spells taken from Discovery effects, a Contract and 2 Walk the Planks, and there was already a Sap and a Walk the Plank in the hand to begin with, and they all got used against Mage, and he ended up winning that game, which, goes to show you how well, sort of contrary to what you might assume, Rogue can play from the reactive position in that kind of matchup.
Yeah. All right, well, we got a quick break. When we come back, we're jumping into game 2 of this set, find out if Kolento can close it out or if Theis can make the comeback with his secondary deck. Stay tuned.
Uh-oh.
My name is Thijs. How did I come up with my username? Well, my name is Theis, and first I was called Thijs NL because Thijs was taken already, so I couldn't take it anymore. And I was a very creative person because I put up my 2 country letters behind it, and that's how I came up with it. What I look forward the most in Grandmasters is the prestige. I have been very looking forward to a more like league-based system, so I was very happy when Grandmaster got announced and really looking forward for like the rivalry between people by all the matches, and I am actually thinking it's gonna be great. What makes me very unique is that I just really am very passionate about Hearthstone. Of course, a lot of fun comes also with winning, but for me it's also the engagement with the community and just like making people so happy sometimes by just like being on stream, being online, playing in a tournament. That motivates me a lot as well to just be there for the community. I have a very preferred style of playing. It's definitely something that I want to be less predictable, but it's always going to be a challenge for me. I want to just prove over and over again that I'm still like one of the best players in the world. Getting to the top is difficult, but staying at the top is, in my opinion, even more difficult. So I'm just going to do everything I can, and yeah, my goal is kind of getting to the World Championship.
My name is Alexander Malsh. You might know me as Kolento. My username Kolento is kind of random. I just took it from the MMORPG I was playing. It was the name of one of my characters. My favorite moment in Hearthstone is probably when I won the Game House Cup. It was one of my first tournaments I won, and it probably was the first LAN I won, so it felt very special. So as for Grandmasters in general, I really like to play against people I know personally and I met before. I have respect for them. I think competing will be fun. Being in Grandmasters is a big honor. It's just a proof that I'm a part of best players in Hearthstone. It's not like I need it so much, I just know it myself, but it still feels kind of nice. I'll just perform well at Grandmaster League. I'll try to keep streaming, and I just want to spend the rest of my time having as much fun as I'm having doing my hobby.
Two very creative names, as they both admitted in that one. They said they put a lot of thought and creativity into creating their monikers.
Yeah, they both chose Kolento. Amazing.
I thought they both chose Theis.
We got the whole way through one whole game without making a Kolento
Wow.
mirror match joke.
I
I thought I'd just snatch the low-hanging fruit right off the branch.
I don't even think they look that much alike.
I don't either. I don't understand.
I actually don't get it at all.
No. Dead
The
meme.
two
Move on.
very clearly, distinctly different people.
Yeah.
Theis has moved over to the secondary deck, which we've talked about. It's Fairy Dragons, 2 Blink Foxes, and a Walk the Plank. Out of the deck are coming 2 Pilfers, 2 Underbelly Fence, and a Life Drinker, so we actually don't want the 3/4s in the matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it seems reasonable. It's the more we think about it, the more it does seem like your assessment is right, and that his primary deck is just kind of tech towards expecting one or both of his opponents bringing Rogue, and this was his idea for making a more powerful Rogue deck in the mirror. There are a lot of debates on how to do that. I believe in APAC we're seeing Perdition's Blade come in as an option to be able to take some tempo.
Yeah, very weird.
You should talk to Purple about that, because I've heard Purple, in the early days of this expansion, extolling the virtues of Perdition's Blade against Rogue.
I have included Perdition's Blade one time ever in a deck, and it was back when Loatheb existed, and he said, well, the deck can't do anything when they Loatheb you, so we put in a Perdition's Blade so you can play a minion of Perdition's Blade and maybe kill the Loatheb. And I was like, that's weird and smart.
Yeah.
And it ended up working, kind of. I didn't like it. I eventually took it out. But, I mean, he is a fan of Perdition's Blade, weirdly enough. I don't really know why.
It's a good card.
It's a cool card.
Yeah.
It's like a bad SI7 agent.
Sometimes it's a good SI7 agent.
So yeah, sometimes you don't.
Why are we talking?
Perdition's
You
Blade.
mentioned-
You're the one who brought it up.
I know. This one's on me. Perdition's Blade is not in this matchup. Not relevant. What is in this matchup is a Rogue and a Mage. Fairy Dragons and Walk the Plank have come in for Theis. And as we've mentioned, and we'll keep mentioning, the players, despite my thoughts last week, the players who are bringing in these more reactive cards for some of these matchups are seeing an increase in their win rate because of it. And as we also mentioned, Kolento has 2 very clutch matches for him this week. He does have the 1-0 lead here against Theis, but if he can take this one home, it does put him in a more comfortable position going into that match later on this weekend against Viper, which is the real kicker out of the matches that we have this week for Group A playoff implications.
Yes, for all intents and purposes, that is a must-win match for Viper.
Yep.
Keeping the Galaxy. I want the world. I want the whole world.
Kolento has gone one better.
Cream buns
he
and
wants
donuts.
a whole galaxy.
Fruitcake with no nuts. So good you could go nuts. Give it to me now!
Yeah, I'm not with you. Usually I'm with you on these references. I
Willy
don't
Wonka?
understand that one.
Chocolate Factory. I want the world. Dum, ba, da, da, da. When Veruca sings the...
From the movie, I presume?
Yeah.
Original movie?
Yes.
I haven't seen it.
Oh.
I read the book when I was a kid.
Okay,
I've
well,
seen the movie.
spoiler alert. She goes down the chute to the fire trash. It's a really dark movie when you
Fire trash compactor?
when you start thinking about all
What
the
is this,
terrible
Star
things.
Wars now?
Well, it's like a chute to the furnace where they just burn the trash.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's when you start really thinking about it, it's pretty dark. Theis with coin is just going to coin out Miscreant. I actually, I'm not a fan of coin Miscreant in this particular matchup. I don't feel like you put enough attack on board.
I am with you. I talked about it last game, and we talked about it last week as well. I don't think Miscreant is quite all it's cracked up to be in this matchup. Theis with the nod, though, clearly happy as to how this panned out, more because Kolento was passing his turn 3 than him
snap.
having a Miscreant on board.
No buffoon.
No Arcane Intellect.
Ooh. Those sound like 3 very good things to have happen.
Yep.
6 unspent mana for Kolento. Hero powers don't count. That's the sound I wanted to hear last turn. You know why? Because I wanted to attack for 3. Instead, we attacked for 1.
Worth mentioning that Kolento does play a copy of Frostbolt in his deck, which potentially gives him something else to do on turn 3, but, small percentage.
Pretty awkward turns here. Half of a Holy Light. And then go ahead and play 2/3 of a Frostbolt.
Yeah.
When you can turn Holy Light into a 4-mana Frostbolt, I'm pretty happy with that.
Sure.
I mean, think about it. If you froze 2 minions at 3 attack, that's 6 extra health. I don't want to do that. I want to kill it so it's dead. And so for Theis, I feel like Shark is not the option here. needs minion pressure.
So many options.
It looks like he's thinking deep about this one. I think he's going to land on a similar conclusion of so what you see, that Luna's Pocket Galaxy is likely the card.
Yep.
Whoa.
I'm assuming that reaction was to the far right card.
That's like a bootleg Wondrous Wand.
It is indeed. That's exactly what it is.
Lightning Bolt is like a
I
bootleg
wonder.
Sinister Strike in this matchup, though. I like the Rat Trap.
I actually do like the Rat Trap as well. The problem with Solarium when you're not playing exactly Zoo is that you have cards in your deck that cost 4, 5, 6, whatever mana.
Yeah.
And when you get to that point, you're only going to be able to play like one of the cards that you get from the Solarium anyway, which kind of makes it a big waste just in terms of card draw efficiency, right? It's not that the cards that are discarded are actively bad for you, it's just doesn't become an efficient card draw card if you only get to use one of the cards.
And then also when you think about it, the way that Kolento's turns have panned out, he's clearly setting up for something. You know, Mage will easily play 3 to 6 cards in a single turn. Like,
Yes.
not really much thought about it. So I think Rat Trap is, you know, for a setup like that, likely to be one of your best bets.
I think you had a turn when we were doing some caster testing yesterday where you played something like 11 cards in one turn against Derek.
Oh, I
That-
just
that
kept
was
playing
fun.
them.
Yeah.
I slung them out in a really bad order, too. But you know what? It just didn't matter when you look down at the end of the turn.
And the game was so won, he ended the turn by just Ray of Frosting a couple of his own minions, just to make Derek feel a little bit better about the position he was in.
I had a mana left.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Am I going to not spend it?
Yep.
It's one of my favorite card game memories ever is I was watching a professional card game player. His name's David Williams. And he sequences a turn, and his opponent goes, "Isn't it better to do the X, Y?" And he goes, "It doesn't matter." And I looked up and I went, he's right. It doesn't matter. For Kolento, this turn really matters. He has to get something done this turn, and when you got 1-cost minions in your deck, you know, namely the rest of them, those 2 draws don't look super exciting.
No, that's about 2 of the worst draws that he could have found in this position.
I actually think those might be the 2 worst draws.
I'd struggle to argue with you.
I mean, I'm serious too. Ray of Frost, Magic Trick, Frostbolt, Mana Cyclone.
Yep.
Literally everything in the deck was better than Mirror Image or Elemental Evocation number 2. Actually everything.
I don't know about the mirror image. I think mirror image.
Magic Trick was better?
I think with Khadgar in hand, the mirror image draw was actually reasonable because it allows him to get a giant on board while preserving a Frost Nova. And preserving a Frost Nova is huge because it's a universal setup card. Whereas mirror image is a card that you can only use in certain situations. And he found a situation here with the Khadgar where he can get good use out of it.
That's fair enough. I still don't buy it, but it's fair enough.
I wonder.
But we're about to see kind of the secret power of Rogue here, which is how well they can just deal with board states like this sometimes. Double Vendetta in hand for Theis, meaning he's pretty much free to do whatever he wants this turn.
Yeah, 0 mana kill a giant is a very good card. Double Wondrous Wand.
As is 6 mana 5/5, get 2 draw free 0 mana cards from your deck. That is also a very good card.
I've heard of dual wielding. I've never heard of dual wanding.
Choose soon.
Only problem here, not enough damage or attacks to get through to that Khadgar and Sorcerer's Apprentice, which are also board objective minions in their own right.
All right, how can Kolento race? I'm thinking Frost Nova, Elemental Evocation, Mana Cyclone into something crazy, and then hope to burn him out. Your opponent's board is full, they're down their Vendettas. I'm okay with ripping both evocations. You gotta have something crazy happen.
Does that second evocation ever become relevant for the Mountain Giant that you have remaining in hand? You're going to fill up 2 more cards here.
Oh, that's not good.
So you'd have 1 less. You'd have the same number of cards in hand right now. So you'd be able to. Yeah, it's so unlikely that that becomes relevant for like Evocation Giant, Conjurer's Calling, or anything. Yeah, I think it's fine to cycle it into a new spell. This makes sense.
There must be a way.
Mirror Image would fill his board here, which means any 0-mana minion off the top isn't even necessarily playable. He'd have to trade off one of his own minions.
It's also
play it.
card played reduces the giant, and I feel like giant mirror image is like, with the Khadgar in play, maybe the one way you get out of this.
You're not wrong.
Whoa.
So I guess you play a secret here just to try and disrupt.
No, you can't. Otherwise, you can't play the mountain giant next
Yeah,
turn.
same thing. Yeah.
It's,
no, you're not wrong.
yeah, it's just, oh, goodness. Just everything went downhill this game very quickly. But this was really just off the back of Kolento not having much to do. Like, he had the Pocket Galaxy, he drew dead off the Pocket Galaxy, didn't have any other early pressure, and no Conjurers calling.
I mean, he drew 1 0-mana mountain giant in his first 3 cards. I don't think that's unreasonable.
I don't think it's unreasonable, but he had nothing to do in the early game. So
yeah, I think the
nice and free reign.
the missing turn 3 was the big deal, right? Like, you saw how happy Theis was when that came through.
Pretty heavily missed turn 4 as well. It was Ray of Frost, ping.
Yes.
Not a good turn.
No.
I got a feeling the Sorcerer's Apprentice is dying.
So many options.
You want a Shadow Step.
Yeah, and the Apprentice dying there is now such a shutdown for the turn that Kolento wanted to have. Well, the Khadgar and the Apprentice both dying is the ultimate shutdown to what Kolento wanted to do this turn. Having to pay mana for this mirror image is just a nightmare alongside that mountain giant.
I think that pretty much just locks him. Everything he does is going to get checked.
He can theoretically live by just making awful Hearthstone turns, but yeah, that doesn't really feel fun.
I'm counting 25, 24 damage minimum.
But he just has guaranteed lethal, right? You just trade off something, and then you just Leroy and use the manual Shadow Step.
You could even just waggle pick. Just attack and return a thing, and then just Leroy. You just have so much damage.
Sure. Yeah, same thing.
Sometimes you just have infinity.
Yep.
And beyond, tie score. Not much of the attack coming into play here. I feel like this one was just really on Kolento not having the goods after he tried to execute his game plan.
Sorry, Spirit of the Shark summoning 4 whelps tickled me for a second. Yeah, Theis squaring it up, and I think you just saw a combination there of just the extra minions coming into the deck from Theis, just, you know, generic 3-mana 3/3 coming out with some pressure, and then Kolento just really whiffing on finding answers for that, or more importantly, finding anything proactive to do before that happens. Because weirdly in the matchup, Mage is actually capable of playing minions first in a lot of scenarios, which is kind of unusual to think about in terms of which you would consider to be the faster deck. But actually, sometimes the Mage can just curve out and just play 2-drop into 3-drop, while the Rogue is sitting on a hand of, you know, Spirit of the Shark and 4 drops and removal kind of thing, and just force the initiative that way. And as you said, then buy time for a Luna's Pocket Galaxy on turn 5, which Kolento just really didn't have that game because he didn't have the early answers.
Yeah. Also just didn't have the draws afterwards. That Arcane Intellect made me sad, because I wanted to see some fireworks that game.
Yeah, again, his first draw was a giant, though. I'm gonna keep making that point.
I think it needed to be like stuff. He needed to have things though. He had 2 evocations and a mirror image.
Yeah, it was a really bad hand. I don't want to defend that.
Like, I wanted Arcane Intellect. I wanted the Mana Cyclone earlier. You know, he had to rip the Ray of Frost and kill a 3/3 with it.
Yeah.
Like, maybe he didn't have to do that, but I think he probably did. I think he just would have died a lot quicker.
Yeah, and I think, again, you see the power of Frostbolt in the matchup, right, which Kolento does have a single copy of in his deck. I think if he'd have been able to Frostbolt a 3/3 off the board there and still have 2 copies of Ray of Frost for freezing potential, that buys him potentially an extra turn, which then potentially draws him a 0-mana minion, which is potentially Antonidas, which then potentially just flips the whole game on its head.
Feels the Cyclone.
There's a lot of the word potentially in there, but, you know, it's small little divergent paths there in a game of Hearthstone that can really change things. But there is an important game number 3 coming up here, and unsurprisingly, both players are going to stick with what they were going with in game number 2. which is still the primary deck for Kolento because he just does not have anything to switch to that's going to improve his chances against this rogue.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You know, 2 decks that are dedicated, one for the mirror and one for warrior, just says that the main deck's fine. I'm kind of surprised by that, honestly. I feel like this is one of the matchups that is pretty hotly contested from the mage side. You know they're going to bring in stuff, so you typically want to bring in stuff.
But what stuff are you going to bring in? You're talking halftime scavengers? You're talking frostbolts? You're talking rabble bouncers?
These are excellent questions.
Where do you come down on this? But I don't mind Kolento's stance where he says, you know, first off, I might not play against rogue. You know, you always have to take that risk. It's kind of much of a muchness either way. You can only cover 2 classes most of the time unless you find some wonder sideboard that covers multiple, but that hasn't really seemed to exist so far. And I think, honestly, mage versus rogue is just fairly reasonable to begin with from the mage's side, particularly in game 1 before they bring in all of those answers to your minions. So it's a very winnable series from a 1-0 position, even if they do then bring in a very powerful anti-mage deck to counter you.
Kolento's hand is interesting. How often do you play the early Cyclones? Are you an early Cyclone gamer?
So this is a problem with commentating Cyclone Mage. I think Cyclone Mage is the most anti-general rule deck in the entire game.
Yeah.
I think, like, trying to give people, this is generally how you play this deck. This is generally what you do in this scenario. In this matchup, you generally go for this. I think it's the most difficult to do that for Cyclone Mage. So my answer to your question would be, it would depend entirely on what's in my hand, what my opponent has played. Do I have good targets for spells that are in my hand? Do I have a Mountain Giant? Do I want to get usage out of these spells in my hand later on with other things? Like, there's so many questions that you have to throw out just to counter that original question.
Whoa.
1-4. Get him. How's that for pressure?
Not good. You know, I weirdly enough don't disagree with this, which I guess it was a surprise to exactly 0 people that I want to get any minion in play at pretty much any, you know, cost that imaginable. But with double Waggle Pick in hand, you know that's going to be a play that's coming up. Oh, this is definitely a Cyclone.
This looks very much like a Cyclone turn to me, yeah. It's not a useful thing to tell someone that's, you know, looking to learn the deck, but after enough experience, you just feel a Cyclone turn. You just look at the cards in your hand and you just know that this is right. It's just an experience thing. It just comes with time.
This is important. This means something.
Yes.
How about Fetch the Galaxy off the 2-spell Cyclone?
Yeah, works for me.
Those Waggle Picks look way worse when they're hitting 0-2s. Well, if you Galaxy, you delay the Giant.
Yep.
If you don't Galaxy, what are you doing? That sounds like Coin Galaxy to me.
Well, if you Galaxy,
Must
the Giant
be a
goes to
way.
7, next turn it costs 6, and you have 5 mana, so you can still Evo it? No, because you'd spend coin as well. No, never mind. Okay.
I do that every time. In my head, just coin is a thing I have. It's a button I click, and the button... It's like part of the game board, and when I press it, it gives me the mana, but then the button blows up.
Right. So you could then go the other way round in that case, and just go Giant into Galaxy?
Ooh, that's 2 turns away from Galaxy. Like, am I going to be able to spend 5 mana in 2 turns on a Galaxy? I don't know if I am. He wants the Giant. I think with 2 Conjurer's Callings in hand, that's really what's making the difference. Don't make the mistake I always make, and do that Shadow Step and replay your Miscreant immediately. Don't do that. Good job.
Yeah, I've already seen Theis make some clear technical mistakes this series. He's definitely an easy one to fall into. But he avoids it.
My pretty birds.
Yikes.
Yeah, not a good one. Oh, if only we would have cast the Galaxy. We would have 0 cost giant conjurers calling. It's so beautiful.
Admirable, please.
There's only one copy of the Walk the Plank, and so I feel like that's where Kolento settled on this plan. I honestly think if there had been 2 Walk the Planks in Theis's secondary deck, that Kolento might have gone for the Galaxy there instead.
I'm still not so sure. I feel like the line Kolento's taken is just solid.
It's definitely solid. Playing big stuff.
Yeah.
He's not under a ton of pressure.
I would like to look further at just the Evo Giant on the previous turn, though.
I hope you like my invention.
He couldn't Evo Giant last turn. He had 4 mana. Coin takes a card out of your hand. So you Evo, it goes to 5 mana, and you just have 4 mana.
But didn't the Giant cost 6 to start with?
Yeah, so 6 minus 2 plus 1 from the card exchange.
So it cost 5, and he was on turn 5.
No, he was on turn 4. You mean the Sea Giant. You'd rather play the Sea Giant than...
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay,
yeah.
I see. Well, after you see the Walk the Plank on the Sea Giant, and then you have the Mountain Giant Coin Conjurers, and Theis doesn't have all the pressure in the world, the start of ugly things have begun for Theis.
Yep.
I wonder what happened if he didn't check the Sea Giant and actually just played like the Heist Baron last turn. 'Cause, you know, damage is the next step you go towards here in your head, I think, with
So
Leroy and
many
Wagglepick.
options.
It's where my head went to. The problem is the lack of reliability of getting the Wagglepick to bounce the Leroy currently, which is damage that you do need.
So if you went face here, so the fear if you just decide to go for the all-in race is that if Kolento either fetches taunts or if he has Frost Nova, you're dead in the water.
Yeah, I think if you had a way of consistently getting the Leroy back next turn, then that changes things, because then you can interact favorably with a Frost Nova turn, and you just say to your opponent, okay, you don't have Conjurer's Calling, I'm going to set up the win if you don't have Conjurer's Calling.
This turn.
When Frost Nova beats you as well, it becomes a little bit more scary, and I think you do have to then look to be a little bit more passive from Theis, but looking at it now, like the passive play has not left him in a good position.
No, he's about to just very, very die.
I feel like he's made a play that loses to Conjurer's Calling anyway. But that Frost Nova really is the kicker that Theis knows that he loses to as well with an all-out face plan. I think at the end of the day, that is just a incredibly fraction of a percent win rate game for Theis from that position, no matter which way he goes.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the biggest kicker you look at is lack of early pressure.
Hey, what are you talking about? He played a 1/4 for pressure. He was chucking
If
him.
Theis had Fairy Dragon and a Blink Fox this game, this is smooth sailing.
Yeah.
With that Walk the Plank. Instead, it's 1/4 into Wagglepick, attack your 0/2s. So Kolento recognizing to capitalize on the weak start with the early Khadgar. Just worked out beautifully. Wrong mage cards.
Choose soon.
And wrong mage cards.
Yeah, what are the right mage cards?
Rhea Frosts, Frost Novas. That's about it. Kolento 2-1. over Theis, and a big win for him as he moves up to a 9-4 match score now, which puts him a cut above when it comes to the playoff race.
It does indeed. He has a even record in the first tiebreaker against Bunny Hopper and a 1-0 record against Viper in the first tiebreaker with a match still to play, which is very, very important. Will come up later this weekend. He's also the top of those 3 players in tiebreaker 2 as well, which is a combined score of the wins of the players you've defeated. So this means he is in by far the most dominant position now to lock up one of those spots.
And kind of looking at the season as a whole, that's now 2 wins versus Theis that he picked up during the regular season. He beat him the first time with Beast Hunter in the very first one. 2 games to 1 was the score there, and 2 games to 1 was the score here with him on the Mage. And Theis was on Mage when they played in that first set as well. So Kolento just getting the better of him this season.
Yeah, and again, got to mention Theis bringing something just a little bit out of the ordinary and not quite finding the matchup he was looking for, or not quite finding the success that he was aiming towards. This not as spicy as the Nomi Priest that we saw last week, but still a little bit out of left field with the extra Pilfer package in his primary deck. But still, Kolento, fantastic player. He's really put on a show, shown that he hasn't missed a step as far as competitive Hearthstone goes, even with a slight step back in the last couple of years. He is trucking away in Division A.
It just felt like it happened so very, like, suddenly almost. I think it's because he's so soft-spoken, where I'm interviewing him or I'm hearing the interview, and I don't realize that he's being interviewed a lot because he's just so soft-spoken about that. Like, when people flare up their personality or they have a lot to say, it feels very different to me. One week I looked up and I was like, Kolento's second in the standings. I just didn't even realize this.
He's just a great player. Like I said, he has focused more on streaming recently, but whenever we've seen him, make a playoffs run, suddenly he's just, super close to qualifying for championships. He's making runs through HCT. He's shown time and time again that he is just one of the greatest Hearthstone players of all time, and you can lose grip on the meta by taking some time off, but he hasn't been taking time off. He's just been streaming tons of the game, continuing to play as much Hearthstone as he ever have, and because of that, his competitive sword is as sharp as ever.
I think back to 2016 in Shanghai, where in one of the interviews that we had with him, he said, Hearthstone's easy.
Yeah, Hearthstone's easy. You just make the right play every turn. It was something equally ridiculous. But speaking of
right.
Kolento's answers, I believe Kolento is standing by to talk to us. Kolento, can you hear us?
Hello. Yes, I can.
So obviously, big win for you. First of 2 this week. How much calculation have you put into tiebreakers and stuff going into the week as terms of qualification?
Not much at all into tiebreakers. Just look at the score. I mean, does it really matter? I can only play well and do so much, and how does it matter if tiebreakers will be in my favor or not at the end?
Well, it only matters for standings, so it's something that you cannot control in that matter. I did want to talk about something you can control, which is your Mage deck. You're one of the first players who actually does not have, it seems like anyway, a game plan in your secondary deck or your tertiary deck for Rogue. Talk to me about your deck building this week.
Yeah, so I've seen many people just bring halftime scavengers, and that's the only deck. So it basically means the primary mage deck is very well suited. And I'm not sure if halftime scavenger is really worth that much to be playing against Rogue to commit a deck to it. So I decided to deck against mage. I know Thijs was playing mage quite a lot, and Viper also. Viper is bringing mage, so this might help.
Let's go to the other side. What did you think of Theis's Rogue deck? Have you played with Pilfer in Rogue much since the change? Do you think the change is enough to have that card see play?
No, I haven't played it, and it doesn't feel like it's enough. It just, what do you do? Say your opening hand is Pilfer, do you keep it? Of course you keep it if you have the Underbelly Fence, but do you keep it by itself? Because it's not the card you want to see if there's no synergy with it, right?
Vendetta not enough?
There are a lot of cards, Thijs wasn't even playing the Blink Fox in his primary.
Yeah, that surprised me, I think, the most about the entire deck list. Was no Blink Fox in the main deck.
Yeah, I think he just wanted to be good against Rogue.
Kolento, do you have anything else for us, or you want us to let you go?
I'll be happy if you let me go.
Well, our goal is to make you happy, Kolento, so we're going to let you go. Have fun, and we'll see you later on.
Later.
And sometimes, even though soft-spoken carries a very large, blunt stick with which to hit you with at the end of the interview.
Honest to a fault. It's a personality trait that I carry myself in some situations.
I expect nothing less. I like it. I like that Kolento's very succinct.
Yes.
He's like, this is enough. Next subject.
Yes.
My time.
Yes.
But we're on your time now as well, so we got a second